Well, welcome for those who are here, those who are still rolling in, and those who are listening from the time that is the future, the fun part of X Spaces. So, I'm Sean Merrick, one of the contributors and voices behind Silk and the Silk account on X. And this is going to be a really fun one today. Another installment in our Stablecoins from the Future series. We haven't used it yet, but when I hear, stablecoins from the future, I just think Terminator and the tagline "Come with us if you want to live," and we could very much use that tagline for Silk and for ISC. Both are prioritizing inflation resistance. That's why we have Richard on with us today, co-founder of International Stable Currency. And we're talking about the design of flat coins, inflation resistant digital assets. So it's gonna be pretty lit, I think. And Richard, thank you for making the time to hang out. How are you doing today?
No worries. I'm doing good. That's a good intro. I kind of think like people don't know it yet, but yeah, like if you want to maintain your purchasing power, you're either gonna make it or you don't. The Terminator analogy is spot on. Just people don't know it yet.
Bingo. Hey, when did you? I think I bumped into ISC like 2 months ago, maybe, which is crazy and just shows how like segmented different ecosystems can be. Cosmos versus Solana. But I'm curious, had you heard of Silk before we reached out to you?
No, actually not. And that's actually one of the main reasons I wanted to come on this space. It's just like bombard you with question and understand basically what you guys are doing. Is it similar to us? Like how do you maintain the value? So I'm actually very, very curious. And I do think you guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have a feature that we don't have, which is privacy. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. The privacy is a big perk,
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's definitely an angle that we could go down, talking about benefits of privacy versus transparency and all of that. I'm flattered to hear you have questions related to Silk. I don't even know if we'll get there though, because I have so many questions about ISC. So we'll just see where we get, and if there needs to be a part two, I suppose we'll make it happen. But yeah, appreciate the love. We definitely aligned on vision and mission, it seems.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I do think if we ever dream of crypto payment to become a reality, there's a few things that we're missing. Of course, like better currency, but I think we've built that, and that was the easier part. The next part is like privacy. It's like you cannot pay for coffee at a coffee shop if it's tied to your bank account, period. Like otherwise the amount of crime that would start, people cannot imagine it yet, but it would be worth it to just wait for someone that's faulty to buy a coffee shop. It's like, hey, there's a guy that's like 100K in his wallet, just bought coffee at Starbucks. Let's catch him. That's like the simplest use case for privacy, but it just extends from there. Like you cannot have how much money you have tied to you physically. It's too dangerous.
It absolutely is. And it's already happening. I'm sure you've seen.
Oh yeah, for sure in Europe, especially. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We've always been super paranoid. We've been in crypto for like 6 years. First 4 years, like completely in the dark. Nobody, not my parents, not my friends, nobody knew I was in crypto for security reason. But then, we tried to launch a crypto project. Like now, you got to talk about it. You got to go to events, and that's actually a bit uncomfortable. But it's a price that we're willing to pay in order to push ISC forward. But it's not comfortable.
Yeah. Give us a little bit of the origin story of ISC and I know it's years probably cooking in the oven. You could fill the whole hour with that, but like a little, 1 or 2 minute snapshot of the origin of the idea and why you decided to start building.
Yeah. Long story short, we started market making in 2018. We've been doing market making for a while. Saw the rise and downfall of FTX. But like a little bit before FTX collapsed, we were starting to think about, hey, it would be very easy to build a currency that actually does not lose value over time. We started ideating how do we do this legally, so that took a while. A lot of architecting how to do this legally. But like fast forward to 2013 March, we've launched on Solana at our hacker house. And at the time, because market making is very different than launching product. So like our experience with launching product was basically reading stuff online. We more or less like did everything wrong in terms of launching a product. We just like, hey, let's just like launch it and that's it. Like at a hackathon, that would be great. And like it's such a good idea. We'll just take off from there, you know. No, that's just not how it works. So the last year and a half has been basically us learning how to launch product, get traction, and experimenting. A lot of experiments, not all success. Some success though. So we're starting to get good at it. But yeah, that's been the 1 year and a half. We've launched a point system, which has been like, okay, we look at what everyone else does. That works actually, point systems. Is it the one and all end game? Probably not, but it does help. And like, that's basically the history of how we build ISC. Very short one.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's a painful lesson, I think, for any builders out there to learn. It's like you could have the best, most innovative product in the world and it actually doesn't matter. Like nobody cares unless you're able to tell that story in a way that resonates with people's pain points and helps make them the hero. Because product can't be the hero at the end of the day. It's like the users want to be the hero, feel they're the hero in their own journey, and how does product support that? So yeah, it was cool. When I first started digging into your product, I liked the Prospera campaign, like the point system you're talking about. You guys have found really creative ways to invite users into the experience and like very bold vision about what you hope ISC can be. I wrote this down from your docs. We believe ISC will one day compete meaningfully with the US dollar as a store of value and a currency for everyday transactions. So if that's the big vision, I'm sure you've thought a lot about what, and people probably ask you this question, what do you think is the path? And then what are the obstacles and the adoption barriers that are in between where you are right now versus a stablecoin like ISC or ISC itself being mass adopted globally? What does that road look like?
Yeah, that's the hard part. Building a currency was the easy part. But long story short is basically it's a mix of incentives, especially if you look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin is widely adopted, and like I would put that in quote, adopted worldwide. Everyone knows about Bitcoin. Everyone would be willing to accept Bitcoin if it was not for the mechanical rule. So it's trusted as it has value. Everyone knows it has value now. In terms of currency, it's terrible. But what they really got right, and multiple times after, is basically a promise to reward early believer. Because it will eventually take on the world. So if you manage to convince people they will take on the world, and I think for ISC it's decently believable, then it's just a question of like, yeah, and I want to be early on that. And that's been done like 50 times in crypto, or way more than that. And that works in general. Are we going to be able to pull it off is a good question though. Because you really need to make people believe that you're not only makes sense at the end game, but that you're gonna make it. That you're the one that's gonna bring everyone else on board, and truly the world will run an ISC. And therefore, being an early believer and promoter of it is gonna be like it's gonna make you rich. So that's one approach. That's very very like typical of crypto. The other approach that we're also thinking about is like just building a long history of essentially like what's the price graph over 6 years. Like that's also a reason why Bitcoin now is very successful, is that they have this history. If someone came up with Bitcoin, I mean, when Bitcoin came about, like people didn't believe it could have value. So having a history of this over many years is another very, very good approach to beating the US dollar. Eventually, people will know that, like, oh, flat coin are actually a better store of value than the US dollar. So a little bit how we felt with the Swiss franc was a better currency than the US dollar, or a lot of the world thinks the US dollar is a better currency than their local currency. And it's rooted in trust, but also in fact. It's like you look at the price graph. What does the price graph do? It's like why, and then there's a story of why that is. Why is the Swiss franc more trustworthy? It's like, well, they don't spend as much money as the US. So okay, that story is like checkbox. And now you look at the graph. Now the issue with the Swiss franc is the graph doesn't look as nice as it used to be. So then people lose faith and then they move on. So as long as you build an upward graph in terms of price, and then you build a product that does that, I'm not saying like you manipulate the price upward, but you just build a product that's stable and grows in value over time. Like over time, you build a very, very believable story. Just it takes a very long time, which is not typical for startup or even crypto project to do this. So I think the advantage for ISC or any flat coin is that we have time on our side. It's not like we need to make it this month. Otherwise, it's just not gonna happen. Which for like most crypto product is like the price graph is all about the hype and so on. So you, like the founder need to really really work hard on maintaining this and keep pushing it and keep pushing it, and like it's a never ending job. But for a flat coin, it's much easier because more time spent, the better you look essentially. So that's our two approach.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for breaking that down. Let's talk about the user experience a little bit, because as I was researching, there was like one piece that I wasn't clear on. So obviously the value of ISC is pegged to the value of the assets that are held in reserve. And the reserves, you obviously know this, but I'm saying it for the listeners. So the reserves are this allocation. It's like an index of global equity, gold, global bonds, short-term treasuries, and cash. And it's, you can see right on the ISC.money website, it's 20% of each of those in reserves. And so then the target price of ISC increases as the assets held by these reserves generate returns and number go up. So how does supply increase for ISC, or like how do I mint it? And then when a user does mint, is it one-to-one backing with those reserves? And like if I deposit SOL or USDC or whatever, does that just go into buying reserves? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially your last point is exactly this. As we sell ISC, we use those funds to buy more asset. And eventually we run out of ISC to sell, and then we mint another chunk. In order to avoid a lot of confusion, all the ISC that are minted, we already have the asset. So we started with some cash that we bought the asset to begin with. So now we make sure that we don't mint more than there's asset. It just avoids confusion. If I were to explain, like ISC is backed by ISC, it's accounting wise is kind of fine. Like that's how banks and the Fed do their accounting. That's totally fine, but it's very hard to wrap your head around. So yeah, it's just sold on the market. We use the cash to buy the asset, and that's basically it. It's a little bit more complicated, but I don't want to go into the reserve system. It's a decentralized reserve system that's not on chain, and it was mostly to make this legal essentially. But yeah, I would invite for like more advanced user to look into our white paper and understand this reserve system. It allows for doing this legally. You could launch another type of currency or asset and do this legally using this, but that's not legal advice.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. It almost, I don't know if this is the language you would use, but it kind of sounds like a bonds system, basically, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's pretty much like it's polarized debt in a way, because we the issuer lend the token to reserves, and the reserve, when they sell the token, they buy the asset in order to remain delta neutral, so that everything balances out. So it's a loaning system in a sense. But like, why did we do this like that instead of just doing a circle or tether model? There's two key points. One is to do this legally, and the second point is to actually decentralize the on and off ramp. Because what happened with Tether and like in history and Circle also is that when they lose banking access, they don't lose the money necessarily, but they lose the access, the ability to redeem, which then it depegs, which is like very, very terrible for a stablecoin. So by having multiple reserve, they essentially, it adds redundancy to that system, because each of those reserve, they build their own banking infrastructure, and those infrastructure will be different, and then there's always at least one or more that will be up and running.
Cool. And then, like you mentioned, I mean, the reserves, there's definitely no, and you're not shying away from the fact that this is kind of a centralized reserve system. You've got a global equity fund with Vanguard. You've got looks like 3 different bond products, a gold ETF, short-term treasuries.
Oh yeah, it's all off chain. So yeah, like
Yeah,
we went full on. Yeah, we went full on like similar model in Circle and Tether. The decentralization aspect is simply that it's more like a consortium of reserves. So there's multiple, and we can onboard more. But it's definitely off chain. So we trust those ETF. We trust the broker. We trust the banks. There's multiple layers of trust. It's no different than Tether and Circle, though. So it's not an added risk compared to USDC or USDT.
Yeah, what do you say when people? Because I'm sure you've encountered the question before of like if 80% or something like that of these reserves are being custodied by TradFi entities, and they're worried about those risks. Like what would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. My counterpoint is that those people still use USDC, USDT, and that like eventually we get comfortable with those risks. Of course, like for now, it's easy to pick everything that's like not perfect. So yeah, that like, relying on TradFi institution is not perfect, but over time we get used to it. And realistically, if you try to design a stable currency, you're eventually gonna come to the conclusion that you need to tie yourself to real world asset. And those real world asset, they only have value because the government is willing to enforce that ownership. If that breaks down, then you cannot have stablecoin anymore, or it becomes very hard to do. Like DAI tried it. They get to a certain scale where they're taking off in terms of like growth and so on. It's like, oh, they're truly gonna become the stablecoin on ETH and so on. But then they hit $3 to $4 billion, and they have to put the brakes on, because if they grow any bigger, they will have a liquidation risk on Ethereum, and the price will literally go to zero. Luna was the same case, but just with cocaine, because it was like on overdrive how fast it will go to zero, because they were allowed to mint Luna. They're not allowed to mint Ethereum. So it's not the same rate of going down to zero, but it's the same case where like the mechanism will happen where they will need to sell ETH to maintain the peg, which will depreciate the price of ETH, which means that they need to liquidate more, and so on and so on. So like the liquidation cascade is always true. Now, in order to avoid this, you need to tap into multi-trillion-dollar market cap assets. That's where like the Circle and Tether are totally fine. They're backed by T-bills, right? Which is like they can sell $100 billion of T-bill and that won't really affect the market. But you cannot sell $100 billion worth of ETH. You will literally kill the market. So you like now you need breakers and so on, or you stop scaling. And that's where DAI figured it out. It's like, okay, we're going to back our DAI by T-bills. And those T-bills are custodied by a TradFi institution. So even like the most bullish case on decentralized currency eventually leads to either they stop scaling or they move back to TradFi institution. But yeah, like that's kind of the story, unless like truly Bitcoin becomes a currency and then we just fractionalize it on like better chain to actually spend and use. That could be another world that might exist in the future. We'll see.
Yeah, that's a great breakdown. I mean, and I think it's so true that every protocol has some kind of trust assumption, right? I mean, we can hold up decentralization as this pure ideal, but nobody's there. you can it's like the ideal that keeps staying out in the distance no matter how hard and how fast you run towards it. And so as long as you're aware of the trust assumptions you're making, the risks of a particular protocol, and the eyes are wide open, that's really all that we can do. So yeah, thanks for a clear articulation.
That. Another big thing is like decentralization. Like you can be fully decentralized and you're forced to take massive amount of risk. AKA Luna and Terra. They took massive amount of risk. Like a lot of people will blame it as incentives. But I would say no, like the incentive just triggered it. The mechanism was always at fault, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in your talks, you have like so much about you're bearish on the dollar. And maybe you would even say like kind of bearish in fiat in general, but particularly on the dollar. So with the reserves, like the 60% basically that's held in fiat between treasuries, bonds, and cash, are those all USD, or are there some other currencies that are sprinkled in there?
So the global bonds is global, so it's not just USD. The T-bill are purely USD, and the USD is obviously the USD. The cash component is 100% USD, if that wasn't clear. So yes, we still have massive exposure to US dollar, and like that's where maybe our traction will suffer a lot. We're a very, very balanced play. Basically, it doesn't matter if the US collapse or does not collapse. ISC will do well. That's how we built it. And now that's where like maybe we're struggling with growth because it's not an opinionated play, and people love to invest in opinionated play as like, I believe the US will go down, so I don't want to do anything with the US, so I'll just buy Bitcoin. Or nah, there's no way the US goes down. They will always pay back their debt and so on, so I'll buy T-bills. And those two plays in finance are very popular. Like you sell a story for people to buy into it, and that's popular. I'm more on the data approach, where like, no, I don't know if the US will collapse. Like we've been predicting the downfall of the US for 50 years. It did not happen yet. We just had the 15th best year in terms of growth. So like, then what do I know really? The fact is, I don't know. I have opinions. I do think there's no way out of the debt. But financially, it would not be academically honest to like make a currency that would bet essentially on the US downfall, because the back evidence says that no, it will not fail. logic says they will fail. So who like which one is right? I don't know. So like really we built a currency that's not opinionated. It's very similar to the Bugle Eds approach. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but long story short, Bugle was one of the, I forgot if Vanguard or BlackRock founder. I think it's Vanguard. Basically pushed the idea very, very far. And it's always this non-opinionated approach to investing. That's like I've been following this for a very long time, and it always made sense that if you go into finance, the less opinion you have, the more you're going to be able to preserve and grow your wealth, as opposed to making bets here and there. So that's built in an ISC.
Yeah, and I've found that a lot of the voices that I respect the most over the last couple of years, whether it's technical analysis or macro, they don't tell you what's going to happen. They say, well, if this happens, then we're in that scenario. And if this happens, then we're into that scenario. And it's like this massive decision tree of contingencies and possibilities, which trigger and play off of each other, rather than, like you're saying, sort of just this rigid thesis that is either totally shattered and disproven, or comes to fruition, because that's nobody in a world this complex, like you don't want to be thinking like that. That's not critical, helpful way of seeing the world.
100%.
Yeah. Well, I want to throw back to your comment on privacy earlier. You mentioned in the docs transparency of blockchain transactions, including the ability to view past transactions, enables the public to monitor and detect any potential fraudulent, illegal, or unethical activities, even if they occurred in years previously. So you're kind of giving a tip of the hat there to some of the benefits of transparency with blockchain, which are well known, more mainstream, like that there is universal visibility into things, and we can see what bad actors do because they're exposed. Of course, what you mentioned earlier, like the flip side of that, is everyday Bobs and Alice's who want to buy a coffee with crypto, they face enormous dangers as a result of that same transparency. So how do you see the future of ISC in light of the need for privacy that you've mentioned? Like, what avenues are you exploring to maybe bridge the gap between the need for privacy and the fact that it's you guys don't have that right now? How are you thinking about that?
Right. So the what you've read is like, it's basically a list. It's from a list of like benefit of crypto. So at the time, it kind of makes sense. To be clear, I think privacy is 100% the way to go. Much better than transparency. I think provable transparency is a good trade-off. But if I had to choose between everything is anonymous or everything is transparent as it is right now, I'll put the everything is anonymous. I do think there could be I'd say somewhere in between where I want to prove everything. And I think with ZK it's starting to be more and more the case where I can prove all my transaction, but otherwise nobody sees them, which is kind of what we have in the banking system, minus the government and the bank seeing everything, obviously. But like, due to their incompetence, like it's barely true that they actually can see what's going on. It's very, very hard for them to figure out what's going on in the TradFi system, but it's more out of incompetence than the tech not supporting it. On crypto, it's somewhat easier at the moment to track everything. Like there's multiple tools that are built to do this, which are essentially, they're so good that it becomes very, very dangerous. So 100% pro privacy. The reason why we don't have privacy at the moment is that the tech on Solana, when we launched like the token extension, it used to be called like 2022 extension. Basically at that time, it was very, very new. Which like we're trying to build something very, very solid, stable, and so on. And it was the right decision, especially at the time. There was no infrastructure built for that. We have struggled. PayPal was basically like Pi USD was the first token 2022 to like have some semblance of success. So good decision. Once it's like more solid, and at the time we had elusive too. So for me, it was like kind of a checkbox of like, if we want privacy, we just need to kind of invest a little bit of time there, and we're gonna get it. But elusive kind of shut down, so there was no more opportunity for privacy on chain. But I do think like at some point we're gonna need to essentially create a new token on Solana, a new stablecoin, to go with token extension and on the other chain if available. Yeah, I think that's inevitable. It's just at the moment it's not a priority because like truly there's not that many people paying with ISC in person and so on and so on. So like that would be a bit like too early to do this.
Gotcha. And I don't know what doors this would open up for you, but and I don't know how big news this was like on Solana when it happened a few weeks ago, but there's like some kind of new integration between Solana and Secret Network. Are you familiar with Secret at all?
No, I don't know.
Okay. It's kind of like a mod. Think of it as like a modular building piece that offers privacy in the Cosmos ecosystem, but it also it like has EVM compatibility. You can like you've got dApps on Polygon that are tapping Secret for like privacy functionality, like plug and play style from Polygon through cross-chain messaging. And I believe this new integration with Solana opens up that level of privacy access. So I'm not a dev. You'd have to like,
you'd
have to go talk to someone. But it's like that could open up the playbook for you a little bit with that. And I could dig out some of those tweets for you later and maybe DM it to you. Not sure if that'd be helpful, but.
So we would need to see way more adoption of that. Like at the scale that we're at, we're not in a position to push, I would say, a narrative external to what we're doing. Like we would need, like our narrative is like stablecoin, flatcoin, and so on. That one will push, and like, because we have no choice, flatcoin don't really like exist at scale at the moment. I think you guys are also trying to push that. Is like that in itself and as a mission is big. Now, if there's a tech that allow for privacy, if like any of them takes off, essentially, we'll be on board. Like I'm not like tech maxi or whatever. If like there's a lot of tooling and that's the easier route to do and it's easy for the user, whatever it is, I'm on board. It can be even on ETH. Like I don't think ETH will ever like make it easy to use, but if ETH becomes cheap, fast, and easy to use, like I'm on board. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to build what's best for the user and push that currency.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty awesome to see on your dash, like since March 2023, ISC is up, I think it's 17.4% since you guys launched. So the goal to beat inflation, you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean,
you're doing it.
Yeah, it's like we've had like very very lucky into that because like price go up and down. We've been like lucky that we show that the price goes down sometime, but usually goes up, and by that much, like just a sweet number that is stable but good. We've been very fortunate in terms of timeline. But we also thank the Fed for the contribution of money printing. Because
yeah.
But it's like I could not have predicted this. It's interesting, the timeline.
Yeah, so I don't want to like make you do like price predictions on ISC or whatever, but I had a little conversation with AI about this because I was like, man, those are some big numbers in 18 months. So I looked into like, what is this global equity thing that, the Vanguard product that you guys have? So basically gold in the last 18 months, gold did an enormous amount of heavy lifting for you guys, like what, 35, 38%, something like that in that time. and then about the same level of performance on this global equity fund, which the top 10 holdings are Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Google, Amazon, Meta, Berkshire Hathaway, Broadcom, Tesla, and then Taiwan Semiconductors. So you've got all of that, like pulling all of the dead weight of the cash and the treasuries and everything like that, which is how you designed it, right? So and then I ran numbers, like I don't know if you've dug into Ray Dalio's Changing World Order or whatever. It's amazing amount of data on all of the inflationary deleveragings in the past of like recorded history. And so what do the drawdowns in equity markets, what do the inflation numbers look like in typical inflationary deleveraging and all of that? So it would be pretty typical in a standard deleveraging cycle to see 50% drawdowns year over year in equity markets. And then you would get a little bit of inflation with that too. So like if we had 50% drawdown in stocks in a year, or maybe even 2 years back to back, and then let's be super conservative and say 25% inflation on USD, the numbers I ran on that, ISC would only take a hit of where is it in my notes here? I don't see it, but the number I came up with was 11 to 13%. So like in that basically very, very bad scenario, ISC only goes down 11 to 13%, while equities are taking a 50% hit and inflation is 25%. So that's not too bad.
Yeah.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you mentioned Ray Dalio. Like if you like the portfolio is literally a copy of the all-weather portfolio from Ray Dalio, and fine-tuned to, I would say, to reduce risk, like reduce the volatility of it, because Ray Dalio all-weather portfolio is in order to maximize return as their goal. For like risk-adjusted return, but our goal was like no, like it's a currency, it needs to be stable. So we added more USD component, and we also boosted the exposure to gold, because if there's going to be high inflation, which is so that's where like maybe it's a little bit opinionated. We have more gold than is optimal in a sense, but like if the world truly goes the direction it seems it's going to go. That would be very beneficial, which it was last year. Like, but even like your scenario where like the stock go down in value and there's high inflation, is actually like those two are counter. Like typically in a typical economy, they cannot happen at the same time. Like if you have high inflation, it means that the value of the dollar goes up. It means that necessarily everything else goes up in value. But yeah, you could also have like, because stock is so volatile, you could have that go down in value at the same time. It is possible. It's just, it will counteract each other a little bit at least. But that's where gold will shine. Essentially, bonds will shine too, because the bond interest rate, especially T-bill, like depends on the interest rate how it react. But like usually it's all supposed to balance each other.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'd love to open things up to the audience here, the people who are hanging, see if there's any questions that our conversation has sparked so far, anything people want to connect with you on. And I know while people are maybe generating those ideas, you also mentioned that you had questions related to Silk. Which like I would be happy to answer, but it's also pretty great because one of the co-founders has popped in here. We've got Mo, who's part of the development team and one of the founders. So anything that I botch, he can probably hit a home run on. So it's great to have him in the room as well. But yeah, any questions that you wanted to fire away with Silk, and at the same time, we'll open this up to audience and anybody who wants to ask you anything or share a thought or comment.
For sure. Actually, like just one, like I'm quite amazed. I've never seen someone so researched as you. That like I've talked to online and in person. Like like the amount of research you've done on ISC is impressive. Like the fact that it's the first time we talk to each other, I just my jaw is a little bit dropped. I did not come prepared compared to you. So that's why like I'll just start with very basic. Is like, again, what's the story of Silk, and how does it work in general?
Yeah, I feel like it's just so wrong for me to even answer this with Mo here. So maybe Bree, can we get like Mo invited up while I start to answer that? Maybe. And Mo, I'm assuming you're able to talk, but if you can't, then I will just answer it. Um, so yeah, on the product side, like the vision of Silk is to couple native privacy with inflation resistance against inflation, and we've got it's so uncanny how similar the way we're framing products are. Even looking at your guys' website, we've got 40 years of back testing that we ran with these numbers, where we're seeing Silk outperform really all the top fiat currencies. I think you could almost say any single fiat currency. And when we were looking at asset design, there was a PEG research team commissioned and put together 3 or 4 different models. Like, what does the PEG composition for this look like? And with the 3 or 4 options they brought forth, I mean, there's so many different ways to play this. Do you accidentally build something that becomes more of a hedge fund, and it's got too much upside, it's growing too fast? Like, that's kind of a danger. You don't necessarily want to build something that's a speculative asset. And so the model that the community was most excited about was purchase power preservation. So the goal wasn't like number go way up, but we just wanted to see everyday users and holders be able to beat inflation. And so since Silk launched February 2023, almost exactly the same time as you guys, Silk is up over 14% against USD during that time.
That is amazing. Like it's very interesting how we came up like the same very similar idea, similar approach to both go to market. That I'm looking at in the website now, it's like a pie chart of also diversified asset back. It's really cool. That I like.
Yeah, it is that.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's just like it's very in compared crypto better though than we did, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, the analytics page has become a thing of beauty. That's for sure. It's you can see it's the over collateralization has ranged between like maybe, I don't know, 250% to 350% with those diverse assets. And then right now as it sits, only 1% is collateralized by USDC, which is the most centralized asset on there. So our community really does value decentralization, and that's reflected in the collateral as well. It looks like we've got Mo as a speaker now. Mo, are you able to talk? Love to hear you chime in.
Hey guys again. Happy to chime in. I think the conversation of really getting Silk out there has been something we've been having. Me and Cora have been having since like 2020. Really, it was always like designing a stable coin that has a value proposition that's very different from what we have as a norm, really, right? Like when we think about like simple, like forget about stable coins in the crypto space, think about currencies, right? Currencies have a problem, and that is like the federal bank controls, or the central bank, depending on which region you are, they have different names, but like the government controls, the value of your money. And then obviously monetary policy changes, right? Like you never are going to have a stable, economy forever. It's going to go up and down. And then during those times, these central bankers, change these policies, and not always is it helpful towards the person who's just saving their dollars, or saving their central currency in the bank account, because inflation kicks in. And that's the fundamental problem of the systems we have so far. Now, having a savings system is a little different, and that's where the idea of Silk was initially set up. How do we stored this value over time that's not affected by central banking systems? And the idea was there is no real true purpose or true way to retain the value, because if we have an asset, like you can think of Bitcoin as a very good example, right? It become too volatile, and if the value of let's say Bitcoin is like $60,000 today, it could be $70,000 tomorrow, and 50,000 the day after, and that is a very big problem for savers. And so really the system came about is that we need to have some volatility, but we need to minimize that to the minimum possible. And so the idea came about from some coins and some indexes that are used by the IMF, right? So they use these indexes of all the currencies in the global markets, and I'm talking about stable currencies that governments use to create these index tokens, and then they monitor the value. Obviously, they use it more for economic, visibility, just for data analytics purposes, to monitor how one token or one currency performs across other currencies in a global market. So it can define which countries are doing better than others, basically, right? So we use such a model in a currency like Silk directly. And I think so far Silk is really small in comparison to what the global markets gives. But the idea of what we have created here is actually already been looking to be utilized. I shared this in my in the news recently, with BRICS coming up with their own stable coin, that obviously the BRICS has India, China, Russia, but none of them can really come to an agreement that, hey, we want to use our currency for global trade. But the other countries are not going to agree to that, and then they kind of a standstill, and then they have to come to an agreement where we create a currency that's a peg of all of our currencies combined, and also they add gold into that equation. And Silk follows a similar model. The only thing we really added in there is Bitcoin, that we feel is a far better hedge towards the future of inflationary world. And I think that adds more of a more of the gains that we have seen really towards really Silk across something like USD. But this model can be modified, and that's really the key part of how we can do this. It's when Silk grows to be let's say $100 million or $100 billion, the model can be decided by governance to change or model in a way that helps save value across time over different decades. That's what we're really thinking about here. And that's where the whole Silk as inflation resistant hedge really comes about from. There is no real true way of retaining value outside of just going and holding hard assets gold, Bitcoin, silver. But if you want to have a stable value that can be used in your daily lives, then you need to have something that's more of a middle ground. And I think Silk falls right there and there. Hopefully that adds to the idea of the Silk ideation in an aspect, really.
It is so interesting to hear someone also talk through the history of where it basically is the same thinking and road that we've been walking probably for 2.5 years. Different decision, obviously, but different same mindset, same goal, facing the same data also, comparing comparing to US dollar, like everything else is a kind of mood. You need to compare to like something that's a little bit more less opinionated. That's where IMF SDR comes in. It's so interesting to have to be able to talk to someone that also has been in the same mind space for the last like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be time to fire up an LP soon, huh?
I mean, yeah, sure. Are you guys actually like in terms of network? I see it's on the Shape protocol. Can you guys talk a little bit about Shape protocol? Like, is it a Cosmos chain? Like, how?
Yes. Yeah, so the quick answer, Shade is built on top of Secret Network, which is, in the Cosmos ecosystem. So there's 65 chains all connected to each other in Cosmos. And what's fun to see is the whole, like all of blockchain shrinking closer to each other too. So really seamless entry and pass between Cosmos and Solana now. So Mo could probably speak more to how viable like integrations would be and things like that. But at some point, it's going to become too easy for us not to make a move like that.
Yeah, like actually, like very meta question here. Like I've been going to crypto events and so on. The Cosmos, the number of dev that are like into Cosmos and so on. I've never seen this. Like Solana might be the other place I've seen. Solana took off massively, and Cosmos not so much. And like truly, I cannot see the difference between it. Like it's high performance. Like Cosmos is more like multiple chain. That's how they achieve performance. But it's like it kind of blows my mind how if I was to take another bet beyond Solana, it would definitely be Cosmos, except that it didn't take off as much. And you guys like understand, like you're probably better informed there. What's your take on like Cosmos ecosystem overall?
Oh, that's such a great question, and I mean, I can only answer that from like a non-technical mind. But I think part of the vision of Cosmos is that every community could have its own chain. Like, so you've got tiny little chains that have unique, application and utility built for their own purposes, and then there's huge degrees of interoperability where you can make cross-chain contract calls and click a button on one chain and it's doing a thing on another chain. Like that level of connection and seamlessness between each other, whereas like Ethereum, Solana, you guys are just massive. It's like the one chain to rule them all. And I don't know that that's not wrong. Like Solana, like you said, has its own so many strengths, so many good things going for it, and obviously is a complete behemoth in the space from as far as market cap, as far as building and interest and eyeballs. And Cosmos is just kind of the nerdy kid in the corner who it's got 60, 70, 80 chains maybe, and all of them can talk to each other. And it's just like a different approach to what the future of blockchain could look like. And eventually, I think they'll all talk to each other anyway, right?
Right.
Solana, like I said, Solana and Cosmos are already getting that seamless level of interoperability, moving towards that all the time.
So that's very interesting because from a design perspective, I would even be inclined to say like that's the right way to do it. Cosmos, even above Solana, it's simpler. Solana is simpler and easier to interact with because like it's one thing, so you don't need to worry too much about I would say scaling issue as a dev or even a user. While for if you need to deal with multiple chain, maybe the user needs to be a little bit aware, which complicates things. But like otherwise, like in terms of scaling solution, like even Solana is not perfect there. Like we've encountered like a lot of congestion earlier this year. More and more, like it's high performance compared to it, but otherwise, like there's a lot of limitation here. and there's L2 start like talks about doing this on Solana, and like I don't know if like the Cosmos ecosystem deal with multi-chain better than ETH, but in my opinion, the ETH experience is broken. You can go on the L2. It's very hard to come back on the L1 unless like the farming has been over and then it's time to move to the next L2. But beyond that, it's like it's not really meant to move in between the chain for Ethereum. So, but I do think Cosmos is much smoother than that. So it's very interesting. It's just like a bunch of decision that to me makes sense. So I'm gonna pause with like why didn't like didn't it become bigger like Solana did? Is it just a marketing event thing?
To I think add there. Honestly like so Carter would be the perfect one to speak on this point. Really, he works at also with he's a big contributor to ADAO, which is like a Atom accelerator thing. So they work with the Cosmos Hub basically very closely, and I think he'll be very good. His explanations are probably the best thing, but in my opinion, really, Cosmos is getting there. It's just harder, like and for example, in Solana and Ethereum, the value accrual systems are very much funneled towards their main tokens like ETH token or Solana token, right? And so everything just falls into that. Ethereum has moved past that. Obviously, they may move past that where they have like all these L2s, but note like L2s also have to submit transactions to the L1, right? Like that's how it works. And so there's very very key ties to, let's say, the core L1 systems out there. And like you said, so Solana has its own like scaling issues, and any blockchain is going to have that when there is enough demand for it. Like it's a fundamental problem that has happened in Web 2 a lot, and we're going to see it in Web 3 if we're not already seeing it. And we need some kind of horizontal, scaling solution. And Cosmos already saw this like back in the day, and they already built an SDK around it to solve part of the problems. But that part of the problems also bites back to the Cosmos ecosystem. Is that no value accrual happens for the key token, which is Atom, right? It's also one of the widest used assets across like in the whole Cosmos ecosystem and even outside of that. But again, people wouldn't like, if you bet on like, hey, Silk is gonna go up, would you just go and buy Atom? There is no direct connection between those two because they are sovereign networks. Like Cosmos has its own layer one. Secret network, which is what Silk is based on, has its own layer one, right? And there is no like feedback loop going from secret network to Cosmos. The only connections they have is that there's this IBC connection which allows us to move assets across the board, which is like seamlessly easy because of the SDK, right? So the value accrual system is kind of a little bit broken in the Cosmos, and that's why I think one of the reasons we have lagged behind in terms of like, let's call it like rank and market cap. I think a lot of Cosmos projects suffer from that because everybody's trying to accrue their own value. While it's kind of hard to do that, it's also making it distributed. So capital moving to like five different chains compared to one does make a significant impact on, let's just call it like, the rank on whatever market you're looking at. But outside of the problem of like value accruing, I think the technology stack is probably the best. So I see a reason for why institutional users should be more open to using Cosmos than Solana in comparison. Would be because that, hey, we have like an SDK that you can create a full sovereign chain, use it for your own use case. You don't have to give a shit about any of the other Cosmos chains if you don't want to, and just do your own thing if you like to do that. And that's the SDK that's been built out for the purposes of developers to use for their own use cases. And if they ever want to make it a public chain, and if they want to like publicly contribute or slash publicly connect to any other chains, they can do that via IBC, which is, I think, the center point of what makes Cosmos really Cosmos. And I think that's where you see the variability in like hey, why is Cosmos so behind? If you really think about it, there's a lot of like top chains that are based on Cosmos and are doing very well on their own. Um, Obviously, everything everybody knows of the Terra Luna, which was also a Cosmos chain, right? The technology stack was all good. They had some economical problems which led to the crash, but as a whole, Cosmos stack is a growing stack, and we will see it more flourish when we see far more, bigger projects come around to using the stack and showing the use cases of why it's so useful, and will gain more adoption. Just like any other SDK, if you think about the Android SDK, for example, it's like just the development kit that's so useful, but now there's like three, maybe four huge companies just relying on that SDK for development of their mobile systems. So again, it's just similarly in my viewpoint, a similar use case for blockchains, where institutions are using these as can use this once we have like good examples set out there. But yeah, that's the only thing I would like to say on hey, why the differences exist in the market.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because again, every time I go to events, the devs that I meet that are building on Cosmos, they're very strong devs. So it always impressed me as like, why don't I hear more about Cosmos? Given like when I meet the dev, they're out there similar to Solana. It was very impressive. So that explains also. So it's very like long term. Is I would say is very very bullish on the ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Richard, I know we're past the top of the hour here. I want to give you the mic to wrap it up here. If there's any kind of last words you want to like close this out with, directing people to your site, your socials, or like a particular call to action or anything, what do you got?
I mean, do check the point system that we have, prospera.isc.money. Otherwise, our website is isc.money. Check our Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. But otherwise, like, it's been amazing. Like, I feel like sometimes I meet people that I really want to connect and vibe with and exchange ideas. And today, basically, I found you guys. So that is such a big win, in my opinion. Because all honesty, it's like you get a lot of DM on Twitter about like, oh, you come onto our space and so on and so on. And I'm very skeptical. So I was very skeptical of Silk also. But I'm sold, essentially. Like what you guys are building makes total sense. It's a different approach, not necessarily the approach I would have taken, but it's a very good approach, a very solid approach. That makes sense. In a sense, you're competing with us, but at the same time, I would be super happy if we live in a world where you guys succeed and we failed. That would be amazing anyway, because we've moved on from a fiat system that basically fund those external government to most people. Like I'm not American, yet I use the US dollar. In a sense, I fund the US government. And same for everyone in crypto, which is hilarious. Like everyone is used, like we dollarize crypto completely. So every time that someone is building a better value proposition that does not fluctuate, and you guys bringing privacy at the same time, seriously, I do hope you guys succeed, even if it meant that we failed. Seriously. So happy to have met you guys. I'll try to invite you at different space or different stuff. I think we can work way more together on pushing this messaging of there's better currency out there. It's not just a dollar. We can build something better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super kind, Richard. The admiration is mutual. And I guess the analogy that came to my mind is it's like we both have pizza restaurants, but they're in like totally different parts of the same country between Solana and Cosmos. So it's like, is it competitive? Like, yeah, maybe a little bit, but I think there's definitely plenty of breathing room, plenty of elbow room for us to both like go run after it, get it, and be highly successful. And I hope that we both will be, because the world needs inflation resistance and it needs it yesterday.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
We're very mission driven. So if we achieve the mission, we're very happy. So we're on board.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the time, Richard. It was a pleasure getting to know you, and I'm sure we'll have more great conversations in the future. Appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. Cheers, guys.